Hello, you beautiful degenerates, and welcome to Links and Locks, the Action Network's golf betting podcast presented by Bet365. Alongside Nick Breckwich, Spencer Aguiar, I'm Roberto Arguello, excited to bring you our Wells Fargo Championship Tournament betting preview. It's a signature event on the PGA Tour as we head to Charlotte, North Carolina at Quail Hollow Club, a very familiar course which has hosted this event over the years, in addition to the PGA Championship in 2017 and also the President's Cup, which is here most recently in 2022. It's a familiar track. Wyndham Clark won here last year by 4 shots over Xander Schauffele, and no one else outside of Schauffele was within 6 shots of Wyndham Clark. So it'll be exciting to see him this week. As we know, Scotty Scheffler is awaiting the birth of his first child. He's out. Ludwig Åberg, whom some of us felt strongly about, has withdrawn from the field due to a knee issue. Don't want to play a ton of weeks in a row on a balky knee. So you see a lot of guys withdrawing. Will Zalatoris last week with a back, didn't want to play last week in Dallas in his hometown, in addition to this week and then the PGA. So a little bit of attrition in the field this week with 2 of the top 4 names on the odds board, potentially. So Rory McIlRoy is your betting favorite, followed by Xander Schauffele this week. We're going to break down our outright cards in just a moment. We'll also break down the course preview, our one-and-done picks, our placement market bets, matchups, everything we have on the card, as well as a rapid fire through the entire odds board. But first, gentlemen, let's jump into our best bets. Nick, I'll start with you. What's your best bet for the 2024 Wells Fargo Championship?
Getting pretty gun shy with all these placement bets of mine that are already juiced to hell with how the market has shifted, and losing Matthias Schmid on the number last week with the cut line. But I'm going to go back to another price discrepancy that my numbers seem to have. Kurt Kitayama, top 20, where ties pay in full at plus 225.
All right, Kurt Kitayama, top 20 for plus 225, all ties paid in full. Spencer, what's your best bet this week at Quail Hollow Club?
I'm going to keep it simple. I'm going to go to Akshay Bhatia minus 120 over Shane Lowry.
All right. I like a fade of Shane Lowry as well, but I'll jump to another matchup for my best bet. I'm going with Benny on minus 120 over Jordan Spieth. Before we get into those matchups, though, Nick, why are you targeting Kurt Kitayama for the top 20 market?
He's obviously a little bit of a semi-sketchy golfer, but for me, overall, he grades top 10 in his expected proximity from the long to mid iron range. And the thing I like about Kitayama the most, obviously he's in really good form with the irons. The putter's kind of been hit or miss, and he does have, I guess, limited history on this course, but very bad last year. I think he missed the cut by 5 or 6 shots when the opening round of 6 over par. So obviously, we hope that's not the case here, but he's a very long player off the tee. Like I said, the mid to long irons are fantastic. And what I think I value here most that I haven't heard a lot of people talk about is just the ability to scramble. I do love his expected proximity with his wedges as well. So that 50 to, 85, 90, 100-yard range. He grades extremely well for me, and he's inside the top 25 on the PGA Tour in scrambling. So he really checks every single box for me besides the putter. But again, with a top 20 placement market and only 70 golfers, if the ball striking is above average is probably the word I want to say. I think that there's a really good chance here, and I would have this price at plus 180, plus 185-ish. But to get plus 225 and ties pay in full, to me, that's just a valuable ticket that I'm going to have to pass or to punch on right now.
We know Kitayama has the upside with him being a winner at another one of the toughest and longest courses on the PGA Tour last year at the Arnold Palmer Invitational. Additionally, top 10 earlier this season at the WM Phoenix Open. So he's shown he can do it in some of the bigger events, even though that one in Phoenix this year was not a signature event. Spencer, why are you fading Shane Lowry with Akshay Bhatia this week?
It's one of those spots where the market seems to be overreacting to Lowry's win 2 weeks ago with Rory. Like, I'm always going to be the one that tries to fade these overcorrections to the market, but it did feel like a spot here that's even worse than consensus because that victory came with Rory. Like, it's one thing when somebody wins the tournament on their own and you get the market overcorrection. It's another where you're hitting 50% of the shots and the same market correction still comes into play. So Lowry has not landed in the top 20 of this tournament in 5 career attempts. You look at that expected strokes gain total output in my model, 63rd out of 69 players. There are some good qualities that he has. If you look at long courses, challenging tracks, that seems to be where Lowry gets most of his success. But for me, this was just an overcorrection to the market to where, yes, I do have some concerns with Batia's safety, but I have said this answer numerous times during these no-cut events that we've gotten, or even these limited field contests. Upside for me is going to matter much more than that safety factor, just because everybody's going to get in 4 rounds this week. Batia for me was one of the biggest upside climbers that I had in my sheet. And when I compared these two golfers against each other, you have one that's a top 15 play in almost all iterations when we remove safety from the mix in Batia. When you look at Lowry, he's outside the top 40. So I think there's a lot of different golfers in the space that you can consider trying to take him on against. I know you mentioned it, Roberto, that a fade of Lowry, probably in the sense of that word, is still the right route to go. I haven't necessarily seen anybody that I hate going that stance against with it, but my favorite play would be Batia against him.
I've got a play against Lowry that I want to workshop with you later, just to see which guy's the ideal player to match up against Lowry. But I'm also very intrigued with Batia, so we'll workshop that a little bit later after our best bet segment. But jumping into my best bet, I want to fade Jordan Spieth this week, who ranks 110th in strokes gained approach this week, and are coming into this week on the PGA Tour so far in 2024. And he's got major downside both on approach and with this putter. His putter has been very boom or bust this year. He hasn't had many weeks close to zero with putting. So I think there are multiple paths to him having downside. And then off the tee, he's been great. But if he can get loose this week off the tee, it could be problematic. Spieth historically has skipped this event on the PGA Tour calendar. He likes to play the events in Texas. So I'm not going to factor that in too heavily. But he only had one event here, or his only start before last year when it was mandatory that he played here, was back in 2017 at the PGA Championship. So it's clear that he has avoided this event. However, he did play well in the President's Cup. He was the only player to go 5-0 on that President's Cup on either team. I believe we actually backed him to be the leading point scorer in that President's Cup. But going back to the 2017 PGA Championship, did a little digging, and that was in the heyday of when Jordan Spieth was really playing well between 2015 and 2017. He finished in the tie for 28th in that PGA Championship, which is not a poor result at all. But in the span of 8 events between the Travelers and the Tour Championship, back when the PGA was in August instead of May, that was his worst result. And he had a couple wins in that span as well. So I think it's pretty clear that Jordan Spieth doesn't love this golf course. So I kind of like reading in between the lines. There's also major downside for Spieth. And if you're a golfer and you lose your fastball, where he's not the player that he was on approach between 2015 and 2017, the short game also hasn't been as consistent. And I just think there's a lack of upside with Spieth, and there's a lot that can go wrong. On the other hand, Ben On has been super consistent with his ball striking and gained off the tee in 10 of 12 starts so far this season, gained on approach in 7 of the last 8, and the only one in that span where he didn't gain was at TPC Sawgrass, which is a super tricky track, which I'm not going to weigh too heavily. So I like Benny On. I think he's playing super consistent golf. He's somebody that I would have liked to have backed in the outright market, but the 35-1 price is just far too rich for me. I wanted somewhere in that 50, 60-1 range. So I like this spot as a chance to bet on him against Jordan Spieth, who I think has a good deal of downside this week. Now that we've got our best bets in the books, Spencer, I'll swing it to you for the first shot at the course preview.
So Roberto mentioned this at the beginning of the show when you want to look at this illustrious history that you get at Quail Hollow. You get the 2017 PGA Championship there, the 2022 President's Cup. I think if you want to date this back to the 2017 PGA Championship, that to me is where one of the significant milestones for this venue comes into play. It was the 3rd time a renovation was done at this property in the past 25 years. Even more length was added to this facility. We already have a course that's over 7,500 yards, par 71. You're going to have these really quick Bermuda greens for the surface, but this is not one of those cookie cutter courses that, and one of those simplistic routes. Like, I don't no shade towards TPC Craig Ranch last week, but that's a birdie fest that just everybody can go as low as they want. This is a completely different test. You get tree-lined parklands, undulating fairways. That's going to present this strategic test. And I think for me, one of the things that I decided to do in my model that probably made me different. I agree with Nick, by the way, at the beginning of the show when he talked about scrambling being something that you want to look heavily into. I included that into my model also, but For me, one of the things that I took even a bigger weight on than normal would be driving distance here. So I understand that if you miss the fairways here, you end up in this penal rough. That is something that's going to come into play no matter how you want to look at it. But I think the biggest takeaway from that is you get almost an 8% decrease in projected driving accuracy for every single player in the field. And my model's always been a really big believer that when you get a long course and you have limited accuracy, that the long drivers of the ball, the ones with length, are always the ones that get propelled further just because everybody's going to miss fairways. You even see that from the statistical profile. There's a 17-yard increase in driving distance here versus a random track. Players are pulling a driver out. They're being aggressive. They're trying to get as far up there since players are going to be missing into the rough to begin with. So that for me is where I tried to separate my model from at least what the consensus is. You're going to get a lot of smaller factors. That's that lightning quick Bermuda greens that I've talked about. There's going to be a 25% increase for 3-putt totals over a standard stop that adds to that narrative. But really beyond anything, it's that two-step equation of aggression with length. So length off the tee gives you the one step of it. The other part comes in from this 13% enhancement in projected approaches from beyond 175 yards. That two-step formula is going to be the specific blueprint in my mind for who can win and who cannot win. You have 10 holes this week that are going to feature somewhere between a 20 to 35% bogey or worse rate. This is finally, and we've talked about this quite frequently on the show, we finally get a track that's going to test players. And we can talk about, and I think all of us, we were even talking about this off air, none of us like these reduced fields of 70 players, these no-cut natures of these events, but we at least now have a venue that for 4 days will possess challenge for everybody playing. So if there's going to be a no-cut tournament, I'd rather it be this way.
Nick, anything else that you're weighing in your model that you think is worth mentioning?
No, I think Spencer made a great point of, how hard it is to hit fairways here. So distance is certainly going to be a big differentiation if people are going to be missing fairways all day. And yeah, I'm excited that he's on the scrambling route as well with me. It's kind of hard to handicap the scrambling, but especially, with all the different proximities of these iron shots coming in with the length of tee kind of different, a guy like Denny McCarthy had a lot of success here, and he's not a guy that hits it long off the tee. So really respecting his long iron play and kind of making different numbers and buckets for those type of players is kind of what I'm doing again, just similar to the last 2 weeks. But yeah, I'm excited for this week. I think anything, like Spencer said, I would echo none of us like these miscut events. I seem like my betting cards on these no-cut events, other than kind of trailing Spencer on Wyndham Clark at Pebble Beach. Other than that, they've been historically bad betting events for me. So trying to limit my exposure, take a couple shots on the outright market where I had an edge, and then ride Kitayama in the placement market. And not bet Tony Finau.
I echo y'all's sentiments with the 70-man fields. It's not ideal. We love seeing a cut. There's drama involved just as a neutral viewer, fan of the PGA Tour. It's an accomplishment to make the cut. It should be that. It waters down a made cut streak where this counts as a made cut this week, even though there is no cut. I don't like that. But a couple other things to note. The greens were resurfaced with Tiff Eagle Bermuda grass. More of a fun fact than something I'm really weighing on my handicap. There were softened slopes on 12 greens to better showcase hole locations for higher green speeds. And there's detailed information here on the GCSAA website on all of those hole locations. Additionally, there were trees that were added to a handful of different holes. I think it is 8 different holes and 2 different spots on the 10th hole as well, where there are more trees. So I'm going to be intrigued to see if those trees play a role in making driving accuracy more important this week. I haven't quite weighed that because I don't exactly know this course perfectly well enough, and these trees, haven't seen it yet to factor it in, but it's something I'm going to be monitoring within the week to perhaps on a Friday matchup or a Saturday matchup add in some driving accuracy if I think that is something that needs to be factored in. But other than that, I echo the sentiments of total driving with a weight more toward driving distance is very important this week. mid long iron play over 150 yards, over 175 yards specifically, are very key. And then scrambling, because everybody's going to be missing greens. So it's going to be tough. And as a result, we'll swing it into our outright section. I can get it going here. Got a really short outright card. Betting on Wyndham Clark. I'll let Spencer dive into why. But one thing that I think separates him from a lot of the other golfers at the top of the field is that he can win with a variety of ways. He can win by getting really hot with his putter. He can win by bombing it way down there and then setting up his irons, which aren't elite, but they're very solid. And given everything else in his game, I really like that without Scotty Scheffler and Oberg, I trust him to be in the mix. He's already got, I think, 4 top 3 finishes so far this season, with one coming in his most recent start at the RBC Heritage, which is not the type of course that Wyndham Clark should be competing on or contending on. So I really like Wyndham Clark. I think there's just a lot of upside, and he should be priced in relatively the same tier as Schauffele and Rory McIlRoy. But we can find at Bet365 right now him at 17-1, whereas McIlroy is 8-1. So I think there's just a big price discrepancy. I wanted to back somebody like Max Homa, but I can't back Max Homa at 20-1 when Wyndham Clark's 17-1. It just doesn't make sense. So I'm on Wyndham Clark, and then unlike Nick, I am on Tony Finau. I
want to be. I mean, don't get me wrong. I've never not been on him. So, I mean, this could be an in-pod play, even though I did complete my card in full. So I don't have this temptation. So I'm glad to hear that you did this, and I will stay disciplined and sit out. And maybe you are the guy that brings Tony Finau across the finish line while Spencer and I are on the sidelines. Unless Spencer's smirking back there, it means he's got a ticket. So maybe you're the good luck charm to get that putter rolling consistently once again.
Yeah, the long iron play, really solid for Finau. Love the approach play overall. Love the off the tee play. Love the scrambling. The putter's the big question mark. So there's a reason he's 35-1, but relative to the guys in that range, I liked his upside. I like his upside relative to other players as well. And I think he feels like a relatively safe golfer, whereas you have other golfers like a Victor Hovland who skipped the last signature event after a poor outing at the Masters. He's certainly searching for it. Jordan Spieth's searching for it. You got other golfers like Siwoo Kim, who also can't putt, that are in that 35-1 range. You've got Tommy Fleetwood, who's allergic to winning so far on the PGA Tour, but definitely could do it. There are just a lot of guys that are a red X for me, and Tony Finau is one that has the upside that I think can win in this field, even if Scotty Scheffler was in the field. But at 35-1, I took a sprinkle on it as well for upside of 7 units. That's my card. 2 golfers, Clark and Finau. Spencer, how about you? Who you got on the outright card?
So I like how you worded that, Roberto. You have a reduced field here, and with a reduced field, you're going to get reduced pricing. Like, I understand that. That's something that comes into play when you try to grade out a board with the implied win probability for every single golfer and what the casinos are going to make the prices on for it. My biggest problem that came attached to this board, and I think this is the issue that I've had probably for the entire year, we'll just say for like maybe even deeper than that at this point from some of these changes that have been made, is you're running into a position here where a lot of the names further down the board are the ones where the casinos are trying to make up for this overpricing at the top. So, I think Max Homa is a really prime example of that. I would love to have an ability to get Max Homa onto my card this week. I couldn't do it at the price tag that we were looking for. Throw out another example. I am maybe the one person in the world who still thinks this right now. I like Victor Hovland. At 40-1, 50-1, if you could have thrown it somewhere in that range, you could have sold me on this. We haven't seen him since the Masters. He looked fine on Thursday before he imploded on Friday. I think there's certain qualities on a lot of these names at the right price. I would have taken chances on them, but it's difficult when you just have every single player, and this is including the Rorys and the Xanders, that are being priced out of the market. And when that's the case, it makes these outright boards very challenging. So, you alluded to it at the beginning, Roberto. I was going to do a single bullet this week. I was going to go to Oberg at the top. My model absolutely loved him. When he was in the field, he graded number 1 in projected par 3, par 4, and par 5 scoring. That's something that was very interesting. Once he got removed from the field and I reran the weights again, it put me in this really interesting spot because I ended up taking Wyndham Clark at 18-1. We've seen the numbers shift ever so slightly. I've made this joke numerous times, but My Wyndham senses really did start to tingle even at the beginning parts of this week when I had Oberg, and I wrote it in my Action Network article when Oberg was still the pick there that, don't be surprised if Wyndham ends up winning, and this might be the one time that I'm not on him. So when he got removed from the field, within a minute of hearing that, I rushed to go make that wager because that still had a little bit of value for me. The numbers dropped a little bit. You can still shop around and find some prices out there that are a little bit better in the space, but for the most part, my math has been very locked in on him. Like, hit him at the US Open at 100-1, hit him at Pebble Beach at 100-1. Those are opportunities where we needed to take on less risk when you get 100-1 price versus, the sub 20-1 total of exposure. But my dad is having a really difficult time seeing, and this is to Roberto's point that he brought up, of why Wyndham is not priced the same way as Xander and Rory. And for me, that means that Rory and Xander should be a little bit deeper on the odds board. Like, if we could get them into the 12, 13, 14, 15-1 range, and we got everybody into that section, there would be a different conversation to be had. But even at the beginning when Oberg was in it, Wyndham was the only name that drifted up on the odds board. So I thought he's a very interesting bet. I think he's going to be popular, but I understand why with the profile that we have right now. I took Sahith Theegala at 33-1. One of the items I always look for with him is the projected increase in weighted proximity versus his baseline projection. That's something that we got in spades at the Fortinet Championship. That was one of the reasons why I backed him there. We got this massive increase in projection. You're not going to necessarily get that same answer, at least as fruitful as it was that go around, but 28 spot increase this time. It's a 69-man field after Oberg pulled out of the tournament. So that really should be enough to warrant consideration for one of the elite scramblers in the world. My model placed him first in this field for expected putting on similar Bermuda green complexes, 7th for weighted strokes gain total, 11th when combining that long iron play with his putter. Talked about this at the beginning during the course breakdown. If I'm going to be willing to allow players to be a little bit more erratic off the tee, and it'll be interesting to see if the trees have any effect on that. I think the Theegala's upside really does see a pretty good impact there because it's a very similar answer from what we've gotten with Wyndham Clark over the past season. Clark went from arguably one of the worst iron players from all ranges on the PGA Tour, and then all of a sudden put it together and became a major championship winner, and look at what he's done with his game since then. Theegala is starting to be on a very similar trajectory path. The irons are not as good as Clark's are right now. I would argue that the putter is every bit as good. My model has him number one this week, but I think this is a similar profile for if we're trying to find that mold of who the defending champion was last year. So Theegala might be the Wyndham Clark of 2024. And then I closed my card with Matthew Pavon at 110-1. This was the massive outlier for me. He graded as the best value for both DFS and betting. My model placed him inside the top 8 when looking into his expected proximity from 150 plus yards. As Roberto talked about earlier, that's a range that will receive nearly a 13% increase over the tour average. When you kind of compare all of that and you look in, I ran all 7 categories and I was trying to figure out who graded in the top half of the field for that. There were 9 names that did. Every single golfer from that mix was 30-1 or less. Pavon 110-1. So that was the one outlier from the range for me. I don't know if I actually think he's going to win this event, but I did think that from a pure price grab standpoint, that his win equity is better than the price that we're paying.
I love the Pavone play. I think he's underrated in DFS and in the outright betting board every single week on the PGA Tour. I don't necessarily bet him outright every week just because you can't bet everybody. But in DFS, I've played him in a couple lineups this week, and I'm just a big fan of his game. And you mentioned the iron play. Obviously, he was a winner at Torrey Pines, so he's proven that he can get it done on a big-time golf course. And he made a birdie on that last hole, I believe, the par 5 18th to win. So he's clutch. He's one of these rookies off of the GP World Tour who's very seasoned. And he also has upside with the putter. So I think there are multiple ways that he can win. And also, I love the Theegala play. I didn't love the price, but he's somebody whom I really am intrigued by, especially on these tough golf courses where scrambling plays a role. Scrambling numbers are a little down this year, but I know you run his scrambling. I know you run scrambling from a longer term than just this season, and I think that's for good reason because we know what guys' strengths are. But the short game can carry him, and the approach play, taking it to the next level, is why I have not only I had placed a future on him to win the Masters, it didn't hit, but I also have one for him next week at the PGA Championship. So I believe in him in these big time events. So I'm right there with you with Sahith Theegala, but I have the 70-1 ticket for him next week, so I didn't feel like I needed to do the 33-1 this week. So hopefully one or both of us catches on those.
Yeah, he was one of the hardest golfers for me to not punch a ticket on. It was between him and Tommy Fleetwood. You summarized Tommy Fleetwood perfectly earlier, saying what, incapable of winning a PGA Tour event.
It's gonna happen.
Said, it's got to happen someday, and that's who I chose. But what's most impressive to me about Theegala, he didn't grade first for me in expected strokes gained putting, but he was second. Like, this dude is absolutely lights out with the flat stick, no matter what type of green we're working with it. I'm assuming they're going to be lightning quick here at Quail Hollow like they usually are. I think that's where he kind of stands out, and that's probably a big reason why he is so good at scrambling. Obviously, his short game is elite, but what he does with the putter once he does get on the green is just fantastic. So obviously, you're going to have a lot of par saves there too. So I'll get into my card. One guy that I had the biggest price discrepancy on was Hideki Matsuyama, and I don't know if I've ever gotten this guy right. But I had him at 29-1, so to get 35-1, I thought was a ticket I needed to go to, and I was kind of between myself here. My numbers love Xander; they always love Xander for whatever it's worth. But the guy's form's absolutely unbelievable. His scrambling is unbelievable. What he's doing with the driver and overall ball striking as a whole is unbelievable. I had him as a favorite over Rory. If I actually go through the top 5 in my model, it is Xander number 1. Hideki is number 3. I got Wyndham Clark number 2, Rory number 4, and Justin Thomas number 5. I know my numbers always love Justin Thomas, and you guys don't like to hear that, so we don't need to talk about that. But to see Hideki be that high up was kind of an outlier for me. Not similar to how Spencer kind of eyes open when he talked about Pavone and that price that he saw there. But Hideki, to me, grades as someone that should be in that top 5, top 6 in win equity, and the books don't believe that that's the case. So again, obviously there's always injury concerns with Hideki Matsuyama, and probably a reason that it pisses me off when I do bet him, because it seems like I'm always on the wrong side of a wrist issue or a back issue. But I'll back that price at 35-1 on the watered down field a little bit here. I think Ludwig would have been everybody in the world's favorite play at this course, but maybe next year we'll get to see that. I did take Patrick Cantlay at 22-1, Tommy Fleetwood at 33-1. And I do have room for Theegala. Is the 35 still out there? Because I was between him and Ben On, and just after listening to Spencer talk about Theegala, it seems like that's just a much better move instead of going to 35-1 Ben On. Ben On's probably someone I should maybe take top 10. I don't actually think he can win here, but I think it is a fantastic course for him, and people are going to, sag off on him because of the limited, I guess, lack of good course history. But similar, the same thing with Augusta when we were on him top 20. Like, he's a different golfer than he was back then, similar to Wyndham Clark. I think we were both on him at Quail Hollow last year. I know that was one of my bigger outrights since Billy Horschel at Memorial, which is a long time ago. But it's like Ben On is probably not a winner when Theegala does have the flat stick to win a tournament. So if 35-1's out there, I think I'll probably just go to Theegala and save Ben On for maybe a placement market bet with Kurt Kitayama. But my long shot of the week here, and again, I don't think he can actually win, but like Spencer saw with Pavone, Pavone scares me a little bit with his lack of wedge play. I think leaves a lot to be desired, and the distance off the tee is kind of a little bit concerning, but his long iron play is fantastic. Cam Davis at 120-1. Seems like a really good course for him. His form is always a mixed bag. It's like he has 3 great events and disappears for 2 and then comes back, and I think that's kind of where the market is. But looking at those long shots on the bottom of the board, Cam Davis to me sticks out. And a guy like Jake Knapp, too. It still seems like the books don't respect him. I don't like his scrambling enough here, and obviously lack of being on this venue, it's probably going to be a little eye-opening, and I really want to see how he does with undulated lightning greens. I think that'll be, it's kind of a wake-up call at Augusta, I think, when we saw with him, too. So I'm sure he'll put that all together in his game, but Cameron Davis is still a guy that I just truly believe in, and I'm going to take that 120 there if that's – I'd had it this morning. I don't know if that's still out there. I think the best, as I refresh now, is like 110, but still I had value on that. I have him at 85-1.
I got a couple notes. I'm seeing Cam Davis at 110-1 on our sponsor Bet365. I'm
Yep.
also seeing Pavone at 120-1.
Nice.
Another golfer that I like this week, which I don't love the timing of this, is Taylor Pendrith, because he's at 120-1 at the end of 2022. So in 2022, between March and I think it was June or July, he didn't play any golf because he had an injury. Came back, had 5 top 13 finishes in his last 6 starts to end the PGA Tour season. Didn't play great in the fall for like 5 or 6 events, and then he played at Torrey Pines, this now being 2023, and he injured his shoulder. And he noted this past weekend, that he'd been battling this shoulder, which has ailed him since then. Didn't get any operation on it, I don't believe, but had just been battling through it. And during that time when he was stacking those top 13 finishes, he was a beast off the tee. And for whatever reason, he's gone from not only not being an elite driver of the golf ball to being below average. And I think that's injury related. We saw him pop up last week in a big way where his driver helped carry him, and he won, obviously. So he did some good things. I'm optimistic on him. I know how streaky he was during that 6-event period, so I don't want to be too biased by a small sample size, but he's somebody who I think has a ton of upside and who we haven't seen play poorly when he's been healthy, just because he hasn't really been that healthy lately. So he's somebody who I'm monitoring. I know that he's not still 100% with that shoulder, and he said he put in a new shaft in the driver a few weeks ago as well. So that's another something that could help him out to a certain degree. I've got a matchup play on him, which we can move it into the rest of our cards here. I've got a matchup play on him where I wanted to find some exposure to him, like your train of thought, Nick, where you wanted to bet Benny on for the top 10 market. I just didn't love the number, but he's somebody whom I wanted to bet in that specific market first off.
Nice.
So I agree with you there. I think maybe we play him next week at the PGA, assuming he's in the field. So that's something that I would look for, maybe top 10, top 20 in a bigger field where we can get a better number. So maybe we do that next week. But love Benny on, had him for one and done last week. I stayed true to my pick on the show, by the way. But I've got Taylor Pendrith minus 103 over Adam Hadwin. Mentioned why I like Pendrith. Hadwin, I know, Nick, you and Spencer have liked him with the long iron play. I like him. I think that there is a ceiling that Pendrith has that's just a little bit higher than Hadwin's right now, sure, because of that length off the tee. So, and I was intrigued by the only minus 103 price. We're not paying minus 120 on this. And I wanted to capitalize on Pendrith's good form. Hadwin leaves a little bit to be desired as far as that firepower and ability to win this golf tournament. I certainly believe he can be in the top 20. He's lost strokes significantly in a few different categories this year. So I think he has upside. I think he has downside in a few different categories, but I also don't have one key weakness for him or one super key strength that you can back him other than really putting.
Here's what I'll say about the matchup, Roberto. Like, to me, they're both stayaways. I think when you look at Pendrith, and this is the very interesting return within my model here, when you compare, and this is just his rank compared to the field in both of these two sectors, on DFS, on a particular side out there, and inside of the betting market. So inside of the betting market, when the odds opened up, he was 54th on the board. Inside of this particular DFS book, he was 31st. That is the biggest discrepancy in the entire market there. I think that's probably the reverse of the way that you would want it to be. I would rather, I mean, at least if for matchups, it changes. If we were talking DFS, it would be a little bit more reverse to where there's like Pendrith would just be a fade for me, specifically with where my model has it priced with everything. But like Hadwin's outside the top 50. Pendrith is outside the top 50. I think this is a spot where Pendrith does get a little bit of a boost. I do tend to agree with you that from an upside answer, it probably makes a little bit more sense since you do know you get 4 days here, but this is a coin flip. Like my model has Adam Hadwin minus 101 to win between these two. So, and that would be with real numbers of Pendrith being plus 101 there, obviously. So, I mean, it's about as close to a coin flip as you can get.
the thing that frustrates me is that Pendrith has played. So he's got 3 top 11 finishes in a row. One was in Punta Cana, so take that with a big grain of salt because that's an opposite field event, and there's no data. And then the week after that, Zurich Classic of New Orleans tied for 11th, no data, 2-man event, so you can't read too much into that. And last week, he won by playing awesome off the tee, around the green, and with the putter. So not approach play. His approach play was just better than average. So I don't know how I necessarily want to back Pendrith, but I'm very intrigued by him, and I might need to see this a little bit longer. But I know that he seems to be like kind of a streaky guy, so I'm very intrigued by this. I'm only going to play it for like a quarter of a unit, so I normally play my matches somewhere between a half unit and a full unit, or to win a full unit, depending on how much of an edge I feel like I have. I'm very intrigued, but also I don't love paying the tax on a recent winner, which I think is also why we like fading Shane Lowry. So he's somebody that I'm monitoring perhaps for the outright market or top 5, top 10 markets in some other events in the near future. But
I guess just really quickly, Roberto, before we move on past that, I guess that's the one interesting thing with Pendrith there is, at least in the betting market, a lot of that victory doesn't seem to be baked into the equation with it. Like it may be for DFS, but whether you look at the matchups that he's included in, the outright number that he got posted, like my model can think that he is mispriced, which is where we're landing here, but I don't necessarily believe that he got boosted up the board, I guess would be the one difference compared to a lot of these other winners that we could pinpoint. So if your numbers like him, I actually think you're probably getting a reduced number at the end of the day, but there's a lot of really bad values in certain portions, and maybe we can talk about it at some point when we continue on this board. And there's a lot of really good values, and Nick kind of named the majority of them when he talked about just names that were thrown out when it comes to Jake Knapp and players like that. Like these were the players for me that I haven't figured out a way that I want to get invested to them right now, but Pavon, Taylor Moore, Jake Knapp, Cameron Davis would be a big one for me too. Those are the options that I'm trying to figure out a way to get extra exposure to.
Those are the exact same 4 options that I want some kind of bet on this week that I haven't found a way to do. So I think we're all in lockstep there. Jake Knapp is someone whom I got to follow last week doing some feature groups. He's got a ton of upside. I don't know that his game is tight enough to contend on the toughest tracks on the PGA Tour. I personally think that the course Vidanta Vallarta is maybe the worst on the PGA Tour outside of the opposite field events, in that he hit 2 fairways in his final round. He was clearly very nervous. He could miss a fairway by 40 yards and not be penalized. He's got an awesome swing that has upside, but when it's off by a lot. And so I think there's a lot of downside. He's not somebody, but he's somebody who I think you can bet on in upside markets. And the fact that he contended at the Cognizant Classic in the Palm Beaches, where his driver is neutralized relative to an average PGA Tour event, shows that he's got big time game, and his approach play shows that. It's just off the tee. I think he has downside, and the short game leaves a little bit more to be desired. So if you do want to back Jake Knapp, I would say do it in upside markets. I'm very intrigued by that, and I think that as those parts of his game get tightened up, I think this guy's the limit for him, and he's somebody to really keep an eye on. So very intrigued by Jake Knapp. He's a lot of fun to watch too. That was awesome. Wanted to get into my other matchup bet that I've been considering, because Spencer, I know you found Batia against Shane Lowry. I really like Batia. I wanted to have an outright ticket. The number wasn't right for me. I think he's around 50-1 right now. I like a golfer who moves it from right to left on this golf course, where that is the preferred shot shape around here. It's a big reason why Rory McIlRoy has had so much success here. Wyndham Clark moves it the other way. So that's something to watch out for. And I'm intrigued to see how these new trees play a role in maybe right to left not being as big of an advantage as it has been in the past here at this golf course. Also, by the way, for Wyndham Clark, he won the tournament by 4 shots last year over Xander Schauffele at 19 under par. Schauffele was 15 under. Nobody else was lower than 12 under par. So he's got another gear on this golf course that I think is important to factor in, that he won it by such a significant margin last year that it clearly fits his game, even if he doesn't have that preferred shot shape. Nonetheless, Batia does have that preferred shot shape, being a lefty who plays a fade predominantly. He excelled on one of the tougher golf courses on the PGA Tour in TPC San Antonio, and I just don't love Lowry. The putter has huge downside. He's not very long off the tee. The short game isn't where it has been in the past. He used to be known as, like when he won the Open Championship, one of the top scramblers on the PGA Tour, he's about average right now, if not below average. And that's been the case for over a year. So that gives me some pause. I like the idea of fading him after the post-win bump. And I really like Steven Yeager. I think he's a very relatively safe option. I just want to get your take, Spencer, on if you had a preference between Yeager and Batia and why that might be. I like both bets. I think if I can get access to the Batia one, I only have access to the Yeager one. I think I'd like to do both and let it ride.
The reason why I went Batia over Yeager, and it was a very minor difference that came into play. Yeager for me graded 56th in this field on long courses. So even though he has the prerequisite for distance that you would want to see, for whatever reason on some of these longer tracks, he hasn't necessarily put it together in the past. I think you can make the argument for Batia, or maybe a negative argument for Batia, that he doesn't have the course history here, but a young enough golfer that I was willing to ignore some of those returns that we've gotten from him. But at the end of the day, Roberto, these were two top 15 players in my model. From a safety perspective, you would think that it likes Steven Yeager more, and it kind of kept pushing out that answer. But when I started adding in some of the sharp movement that's come into play with it, and when I added in some of the downside traits that maybe I had weighed a little bit less, and then I ramped up the weight for it for some of these safer markets, Yeager moved in the reverse direction there. But it kind of is, like I said at the beginning of the show, even, there's really no matchup out there that I can find against Lowry that I'm not willing to punch the ticket on, and because I think they all have value because of the boost that Lowry's gotten in the market. It's just if I'm power ranking them, it probably goes Batia, Yeager, and then I believe there's like a Brian Harmon price out there also, and we won't talk about Brian Harmon. I don't want to get Nick started on
not
that.
Today. But... Nope, not before Mother's Day, guys. Nice peaceful week here.
All right, so that's it. Those were the plays I was considering. I think I'm going to go 0.35 units, or to win 0.35 units on both Batia and Yeager, assuming I can find Batia, or else I'll just do 0.7 units on Yeager. So a little bit more than double the amount that I'm going to play on the Pendrith one, which is more of a sprinkle. Gentlemen, what else do you guys have on your card? I'll start with you, Nick.
That's it. Just Kurt Kitayama, ties in full. I was thinking about taking Sahith Theegala over Morikawa at plus 105. Very, very minimal edge for me, and I feel like picking on Morikawa just is something I don't want to do. But I am damn near all in on Theegala. I think he will be my one and done pick, Spencer. So take that for what it's worth. You could have Wyndham Clark if you still have him around. This is between Wyndham Clark and Theegala for me, though. But yeah, nothing on the card other than that. It is 1.88 at risk. So I do have some room for some in-play stuff, but I do want to see how these trees, like it, if hitting a fairway is a premium that we didn't really, I guess you kind of handicapped it a little bit more this week, Roberto. But other than that, it's like I don't want to bet a ton on the unknown, especially with this no cut event stuff. Again, has kind of kicked my ass all year long.
It's also just for the record on that, it's also priced into the equation. I've said this numerous times on the show, but any single time that a book has question marks that they don't know the answer to, they remove any of the potential edge that you can find. So there's a lot of that's coming into play with this tournament.
Yeah, we got a 33% hold percentage at one of the major legal players on the outright market. That's fun. Good for you.
Spencer, any other plays on your card so far this week?
The only other thing that I punched a ticket on was Pavon top 20 at plus 280. Okay. I'm going to trust my numbers there. There's nothing else in the placement market. Like Nick and I were talking about this before the show. There was nothing else I could find that had a value. There were very close ones. I like his Kitayama play. Kitayama was a top 30 player in my model. I think the price that Nick got makes a lot of sense with it. But with some of the numbers that are being released there, I didn't see a ton for this tournament. So it's going to be a minimal week. I'm hoping that some of these in-tournament plays, we can find an edge there. But other than that, it's just going to be a very straightforward card of the three outrights I have, the one matchup that I've talked about, and then that plus 280 bet.
I like Pavone, and I have a future on him next week as well for 100 to 1. So I like him. I might tell you on that top 20 if I can see what the ties paid in full number looks like, just because that's kind of my preferred route, along with Nick's, I believe. Spencer, I wanted to jump into, so one of the reasons why I also wanted more of a limited card this week is because there's so many of these guys who do have that top tier upside, like a Victor Hovland, who was one of the first players that I considered betting, whom I didn't. I wanted to see if any of those guys are playing really solid golf and if they fix certain things that I'm looking for them to fix. You, on the other hand, Spencer, you said that there are certain bets that you really didn't want to make. Would you mind sharing any of those to help our audience from avoiding those pitfalls? To avoid those pitfalls.
So I think for me, the players, and I haven't necessarily seen any matchups against them. I do think this is something though, and this is kind of where my model always goes. Like if you notice, the one thing about my math when I pull it from an in-tournament betting perspective, when we get the after Thursday rounds, after Friday rounds, it's the players that overachieved in my model that my model didn't like before the tournament started. And by overachieving, it means that they didn't strike the ball very well and they overachieved to their baseline with some of their short game metrics. So regression is due to hit in those spots. That's going to be these players that I'm talking about right now. I haven't necessarily found a way to back or fade most of them, but Will Zalatoris is the number one most mispriced player that I have on the board this week. I understand that a lot of people think of him at a hard, difficult course and always want to try to punch that ticket. I think that there may be an intriguing opportunity to come into play for some of these in-tournament matchups, specifically if we can get a spot here to where potentially he ends up playing well on day one and we might be able to take him on. I mean, a lot of these other names are going to be like your common options that we would mostly talk about. Ricky Fowler, Sungjae Im. Curious to see if I can find matchups against them at some point. I'm not necessarily as low as you are, Roberto, on Jordan Spieth. I think he's a boom or bust commodity, but I do think he has a little bit of upside. So I'd be curious to see where he ends up landing the first couple days and then maybe going from there with it. But, you know, on the flip side of that answer, like if you're looking for players that have some value that I would be looking to attack potentially, I like Adam Schenk. I'd be curious where you guys have him. My numbers thought he was a very intriguing option this week. We talked about Knapp. We talked about Cameron Davis. Steven Yeager's always one of those underrated commodities for me. And then Brendan Todd was the interesting one. I think a lot of that inside of my model came into play just because of the course history that propelled this profile a little bit more. But I don't know. My model had him inside the top 20 for safety and inside the top 35 from an overall rank. And that's a better output than I would expect to have for Brendan Todd at a course that's, you know, over 7,500 yards.
Shout out to Brendan Todd for being one of the really good PGA Tour golfers who, for being like the only PGA Tour golfer that I think multiple members of this podcast can outdrive. But
I'm not one of those people.
Oh, come on, Spencer. You got some ball speed hidden in there. Somewhere in that computer, we'll model up a good swing. We'll be ready. We do got to have a pod golf outing one day, though.
Come through to Austin in first week of September, Spencer. But
I think he'll kick our ass in fairways hit. But yeah, we'll take him in distance there.
Spencer, so Brendan Todd will also kick our ass in fairways hit, but he also has the rest of the game to compete. And he finished in the top 5, I believe, at the Arnold Palmer Invitational earlier this year, with Bay Hill being one of the 5 toughest tests on the PGA Tour. He just doesn't make a ton of bogeys given his short game. So even if he might not have all that upside, his putter is basically a vacuum. It's just he doesn't have the distance to compete consistently. He needs everything to be firing on all cylinders. So there's just less margin for error, but he absolutely can do it. And I think that if you want to get contrarian and if you want to play a plotter to be in the top 5, top 10, I think that's the way to do it instead of betting them to win outright in a tournament like this where you're playing on a big boy golf course. I think that's a sneaky way of playing those guys and maybe even being contrarian in DFS if you know a guy is firing on all cylinders. One guy I wanted to touch on when you mentioned Spencer was Adam Schenk. Schenk always intrigues me with those mid-long iron numbers, and he's long off the tee. He's 6'4". He's got really fast ball speed. I think it's over 180. Actually, I have it up. But his ball speed's 178.72, 36 on tour. Got to follow him for feature groups last week when he was pummeling it over 180 quite a few times. The problem with Schenk on, I think it was Saturday when we followed him, his putter was really, really struggling that day. It was one of the worst in the field. And he was doing something strange where he would line up over the ball at address and he would almost look back and see whether the line on his putter was on the right line toward his target. I've never seen a professional golfer do that. It was really awkward. Our walker, Robert Dameron, was kind of freaking out. Like, what the heck is this guy doing? He was missing some birdie putts inside of 5 feet. It was tough to watch. And he had like a 10-inch putt that he almost missed. It was shocking. But Sunday, so in that Saturday round, he was also lined up too close to the ball, or closer than I've ever seen him do it. It was awkward. It didn't look like his arms were able to flow. On Sunday, his putter was a lot better. I think he shot 5 under par and finished somewhere in the top 15. I think Adam Schenk figures it out with that putter. That final round where he shot 5 under par is indicative of him figuring something out. And I think he has real upside. I think he could win this tournament. I think he was also around 50, 60 to 1 to win this tournament.
I feel like he's a guy that should light it up at Memorial, especially like with his current form. I want him on a bent grass surface where he's kind of used to, like, grew up on playing. But yeah, he's got the distance, like you said. I feel like that's I don't think it's a future market that's open, but I'm very interested in Adam Schenk if he does figure out that putter consistently over 4 rounds at a course like that, where we'll probably get him at 85 to 1. Is that a no-cut event though this year?
No, that's Jack's event. So it's gonna have a cut. It should have a limited field though.
Okay.
But it will have a cut.
Yeah.
The player invitationals, Jack's, Arnie's, and Tiger's Genesis. Those are the only 3 signature events with cuts in addition to the players.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm bullish on Schenk. I didn't love the 65 to 1 number. If it gets up to 80, I'll add it. Or maybe in tournament, if he shoots a 2-3 under par, somebody else is at 7 or 6, and I think he's within striking distance, I might sprinkle something. But Schenk is absolutely somebody whom I am very bullish on, and I know that you guys really liked him last week in Dallas as well. So that also makes me feel a little bit more confident.
Save my one and done with this Sunday round. I was worried about him. We have any thoughts on Ricky? He's kind of back, guys. I've been trying to tell you that, but no one listens.
The putter has to be a strength for Fowler, and
that's true.
I haven't seen that it is. I think it's not the weakness that it was to start the season, and he's definitely shown some more flashes consistently with the irons. But until the putter is really an asset, I can't back Ricky Fowler in outright markets. I think that if you want to go in a matchup, that could be interesting. I'm not sure who he's playing, but for me right now, I'm out on Fowler, but we know the course history is sticky and he's had a lot of success here.
Dog to Keegan, dog to Billy Horschel. Oh, yeah, that one intrigues me.
I like Horschel this week. I mean, maybe not to the answer of I think Horschel's going to win this golf tournament, but I think in a 69-man field, I would say Horschel is a fringe top 30 player. I mean, and when you're looking at what the price is, I mean, I think that's probably where Horschel could have some value in some of those opportunities for me against a name like Ricky Fowler, but that's just where I'm at with it.
You'll believe someday.
Before we get into our one and done, a reminder that this podcast is presented by Bet365, and Bet365 doesn't do ordinary. That's why you get more boosts with them than with anyone else. Every day, they power up the odds on hundreds of bets to give you a chance to win more. Bet365 boosts specific markets, your winnings, and even parlays. And they don't stop there. Keep an eye out for their biggest and best odds with the incredible Super Boost. Check out the boost and see why it's never ordinary at Bet365. Must be 21 or older and present in Arizona, Colorado, Indiana, Iowa, Louisiana, North Carolina, New Jersey, Ohio, Virginia, or 18 and older in Kentucky. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. Terms, conditions, and restrictions apply. All right, fellas. Nick, you're still in the lead in our one and done by a healthy amount, I believe. So we
just about a mil. Just about a mil.
All right. We know that you are between Wyndham Clark and Sahith Theegala. Is that who you mentioned earlier?
Yes, I'm going with Theegala.
Okay.
Confirmed. Locked in. I'm going to save Wyndham. Like a guy like Theegala, as elite as I do think he is, and I think Spencer was just dead on like that he may be the next like Wyndham Clark, just massive jump in his career in 1 year type of change. I still think he's a little volatile, and if these trees kind of come into play and he sprays it all over the place. Like I'd rather get exposure to Thigala while I have a lead in a no cut event than play him when I'm bullish on him in a couple weeks or something like that. And there's a cut and he misses the cut, and then my whole season here is suspect. So going with Thigala.
I'll jump in next. I love Thigala. I already used him though at the Century. Got second, so great pick.
That was a good play. Really good.
I'm between Rory McIlRoy and Wyndham Clark. I don't think I'm allowed to bet Rory McIlRoy for the foreseeable future, but I have to use him for one and done. And if I'm going to do that, this is as good a course as any for him. Yeah. Bombers course, no Scotty, no Ludwig. If he plays his best golf, I think he's going to win. I also love Wyndham Clark, and given how well he played here last year, how he separated himself from the field, I think those are my top two choices. I've been saving them, and I'm going to use one of them this week. I've got Rory in there right now.
Take Rory.
But I think I might go to Wyndham Clark.
Dude, I don't. Let's look at the leaderboard.
I'm going to have to look back and see who does and doesn't have the other guys available, and I think that might separate it for me.
Our guy in second, who's one in front of you, does have Rory available. So, yeah, I was going to say, like, this would be a good set. Like, if Rory wins, you would take first if you took him. So,
I'm very intrigued.
I like the game theory of you going with Rory here.
Spencer, who you got?
So, Roberto, if you take Rory, I will on air, because Nick... you don't get into first place in one of these contests without just being an immaculate picker. I owe Nick a lot of credit. Like, I very rarely do you lose a bet.
Saved his ass last week.
And you actually find a way to, like, win money from it in this contest. So, obviously, Nick gave me, if you didn't tune in, Alex Noren when he selected him over Jordan Spieth. For the show here, if you decide to take Rory, I will let Nick choose my pick here.
I'll give you Wyndham Clark. If he goes Rory, I got Thigala, you got Wyndham. I feel like those are three of the guys that we're most confident in this week. And I do want you to succeed. I would love all three of us to be in the top three by the time this is over. But Spencer, you're going to need a miracle buddy. And I think this week it starts with Wyndham Clark getting a W for you.
We'll have conversations off air. I don't think Roberto wants to commit to this right now, but the two options I was going to give you to pick between would be Wyndham Clark or Patrick Cantlay.
Ooh. Yeah, I mean, I would give you Wyndham, but I do like Cantlay. I mean, I have a ticket on him. He's hitting the driver hard, too. That guy's getting some ball speed, too, Roberto. Isn't he? I don't know if he's, like, speed training, but what's his ball speed? Do you have that pulled up? He's got to be upper 170s, right?
Cantlay is 177.
Yeah. So do you have what it was last year or no?
I can find it, yeah.
That'd be interesting. I just want to make sure that theory is true, because his distance for me this year compared to my model last year for it is significantly different. Expected distance.
Same ball speed, so maybe we just got more spin on it this year.
Okay.
175
less
2 years ago.
Right?
More spin. You get more spinny and then get caught in the air, but it also just kind of depends on the launch angle. So
yeah, sure. All right. Well, yeah, I will. I'll nominate Wyndham Clark, and I like all three of our picks this week. Then.
All right, then I'll lock in Rory just so that we all have.
There we go.
Perfect.
He's gonna head fake you though, Spencer. We all know it's
because
maybe. Yeah, we've already pulled that multiple times this year.
I might save Wyndham for Castle Pines then, the MW Championship, last event of the year. In his native Colorado, by the way.
I'm excited to see that.
That's the tournament I'm most excited for outside the majors this year. Gentlemen, we'll skip the rapid fire because I know we're running short on time. Nick, where can we find your work this week?
At Better Golf Pod on Twitter, and then at Sticks Picks on Twitter as well, or X, whatever we call it, and then Best Bets over at Action Network. Looking forward to a good week. I'm sure Spencer and I will do Better Golf Pod this week, and then again maybe early next week on Tuesday for the PGA Championship as we break down the DFS field. So it should be a fun one.
Awesome. Be sure to tune in to Better Golf Pod. Spencer, where can we find your work this week?
You can find me on Twitter at TOffSports. My articles will be over on Action Network and Rotoballer. You can also go get my model over at Rotoballer if you like any of the numbers you heard here today. So It's going to be a busy week next week. We're gearing up for the PGA Championship.
Awesome. I'm super excited for next week at Valhalla. You can find me on Twitter at RobertoA213, also on the Action Network, where I'll be putting out a bunch of content over the next week for the PGA Championship, starting off on Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening, all the way through Wednesday. We'll have everything for you. We'll have one and done picks. We'll have outright bets. We'll have Spencer's data-driven picks. We'll have course preview. We'll have player rankings. I think I'm going to rank the top 50 players at the PGA Championship, and then I'll go down a few other rabbit holes as a result of that and have some more articles for us on the Action Network website and app. So be sure to download the Action Network app. Also, give them a follow on all social media. Our guys have been giving out great picks, not only for golf, but for the NBA. If you listen to our Buckets podcast like I do, maybe you got in on the 70-1 Wolves to win the title future. I only got it at 50-1. Got a few others on the Wolves to win the West. I also had them for the in-season tournament and number 1 seed. So we've been all in on the Wolves. It's exciting times for us on Action Network, but there's always tons of other stuff going on. Sean Zarilla's projections for MLB every single day. So whatever sport you follow, be sure to check out what we got going on Action Network. So for Nick, for Spencer, I'm Roberto. Thanks again for tuning into our show, and we'll see you guys next week in Louisville for the PGA Championship.